30 years ago, the Social Security system, the entitlement system of the country of Chile, was completely broken. Then José Piñera came in. He privatized Social Security in Chile, 9.2% average annualized return. He is your exclusive guest to talk about our system, our entitlements, and why we have got to privatize our system. Otherwise, we are going to be in big economic trouble. We are very honored to be joined by José Piñera. He is the founder of the International Center for Pension Reform. He is the former Labor and Social Security Minister of Chile and a distinguished senior fellow at the Cato Institute, up from Santiago into D.C., which is where we are. Jose, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Brian.
Last week, we hit hard on the program the latest Pew Center study showing that states have about $1 trillion gap in their just state pension plans. How do we solve that?
Well, that is a very serious problem, and I am extremely worried about all the debts America has. But you have a much bigger problem, Brian. You have $100 trillion problem. Look, this is something published by the American government saying that the present value of the obligations on health and Social Security amount to $100 trillion.
Okay, wait a minute. We were talking about 3-point-something trillion, $1 trillion underfunded. You're saying we have $100 trillion. Where is that number coming from? How do we get to $100 trillion?
This comes from the government. This is not recognized in the public debate, but this is the real debt of America. This amounts to 700% of GNP. This is a gigantic liability that basically you are legislating and will be paid by your children and your grandchildren.
Let's walk through what that is, okay? Because these are new numbers. These are big numbers. These are coming from the CBO, correct?
These are coming from the government, from the U.S. government. These are net liabilities of the health, Medicare, and Social Security system. This is the present value of what Americans will have, one way or another, to pay unless they default on their obligation to the citizens. And that is the future. And I'm extremely worried because it is like you are passengers in the Titanic. You see, the Titanic is going toward the iceberg of aging populations, but populations that feel entitled to all these huge benefits that the politicians have promised the people. But they have not funded the benefits for the future. So how are you going to pay them? That is the big issue, the big domestic problem facing America.
One of the big stories today is the president unveiling his own health care plan. So on this piece of paper, again from the CBO, $35 trillion in hospital insurance for current and future, $34 trillion for Medicare Part B, about $18 trillion for drug benefits, then Social Security. So actually Social Security, which we're going to talk about a bit later on, that is actually a big hole, but it's smaller than health care. How are we going to pay for this? How does the U.S. cover $100 trillion, Jose?
Brian, the problem is what I call the entitlement state. The problem is that there is a gigantic disconnect between what people want the government to pay them in the future, in health, pensions, and what the people want to pay in tax. And because the entitlement state is based on promises for the future, you don't have to pay today. This is growing because to win elections, politicians offer benefits to people that will be paid in the future. So this big hole is not only a problem in America, it's exactly the same problem in Greece today, in Southern Europe, eventually in France, in Germany. The West will go bankrupt unless you reform deeply the entitlement state. This was created by Prince Bismarck in the 19th century, and you are all prisoners of Prince Bismarck, prisoners of a system that is
Otto von Bismarck.
Yes.
Because he created
the unfunded tax and expense system. You see, he simply said, if you tax workers a little, we can pay the pensions. But then the unintended consequence has been that with the aging of population and the extended life, you have been accumulating these huge liabilities that eventually will bankrupt the government. A huge fiscal crisis is coming to the West unless you face it and confront it directly by completely changing the entitlement state. That is the root of the problem.
I want to get more on Social Security in just a bit, but for pensions, okay, state and federal pensions, the gap between retirement ages between private and public is growing wider. The gap between the amount of money being given in pensions is growing wider. How do we just solve the pension crisis on government workers, federal and state? And is it unsustainable as it is?
It is totally unsustainable. You either will have to raise taxes big time in America, or you will have to cut benefits. But it's extremely difficult to do that in a system in which you have people entitled to all these things. That's why what we did in Chile was to completely change the logic. In Chile, you save for old age. In Chile, we have a sort of Benjamin Franklin system. You see, you remember Benjamin Franklin, the 13 virtues. You should save for the future. You should be self-reliant. So we have instilled a culture of personal responsibility and saving. Of course, we also have a safety net for the very poor. But 80–85% of the population will finance their old age, health, and pension with their own personal savings.
We're going to take a quick break, Jose. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about what you did in Chile and what we might have to do here. Look at some of the pretty scary numbers around Social Security and also what we can do about it. Will the Chilean plan work here? How does it work? We are going to learn as we continue part 2 of our exclusive interview with José Piñera right after this. Welcome back. I'm Brian Sullivan in Washington, D.C. today, and I'm here because we are being very privileged to speak to José Piñera. He's the architect of Chile's Social Security reform. He's the former Labor and Social Security Minister and the founder of the International Center for Pension Reform. It's an exclusive interview, and Jose, we're very happy to have. Listen, although some of the numbers you're throwing around are pretty frightening, there's a lot of debate in this country about whether or not our Social Security plan, our system, is going to be there for people that are in their 20s and 30s. And there's a big debate about whether or not we're going to be solvent by 2040. Do you believe that the U.S. system as it is now can be solvent decades from now?
Clearly not. Clearly not. In only 7 years, the Social Security system will begin to have a deficit. That is, more money will have to be spent than money coming in. And then you will face the very hard choices. You will probably have to increase the retirement age. You will probably have to increase payroll tax. You may have to cut benefits, unless you change the paradigm and you go to a system of personal accounts. Personal accounts is very simple. You save for old age, and that saving gets accumulated rate of return, so you benefit from that extraordinary force of compound interest. And when you reach 65, you don't look whether the government is in deficit or in surplus. You look at the balance of your account, and with that you buy an annuity for life. It's a system that we had all over the world before Otto von Bismarck, a Prussian chancellor, created this monster of the unfunded welfare state that is bankrupting Europe and eventually the U.S.
That is the problem with Social Security, right? It's that we are using money now. Instead of me saving for myself, the money that is taken out of my paycheck, out of everybody in this room's paycheck, is being paid to current beneficiaries. Exactly. You have described that as a Ponzi scheme.
That is a Ponzi scheme. You could even call it the Madoff scheme. You see, because it's the idea.
Hopefully the money is real somewhere.
No, there is no money being saved for the future. There is no funding. There is no trust fund. You are paying the money immediately to the retirees. And the problem is that with the baby boom generation retiring, with the expectancy of life increasing every single year because of your great doctors and researchers, you will not be able to pay the promises. So the system will eventually default, technically default, in the sense that you will have to break the promises to the people, and that may create a lot of pain and a lot of anguish. That's why you have to look into the future, do the responsible thing, and begin moving toward a system of personal accounts. It's the only long-term solution.
71 million people will be 65 in this country by 2030. 330 people turn 60 years old every hour right now, but they're expecting benefits. How would we implement a system like yours with everybody already expecting the current system to be there for them?
The first decision that I took as Secretary of Labor and Social Security in Chile was to guarantee the benefits of the elderly. I call it, we are not going to take your grandmother check away. We will find a way to protect the elderly. So the system has to be changed for the young people, for the future that are coming into the labor force or are already in the first years of the labor force. And the moment you change the dynamic and people begin to know that if they save more, they work more, they will get a better pension out of their own saving, then the whole system begins to improve.
The criticism will be that we are at an 11-year flat line for the stock market, that if you have your money in the stock market for 11 years, you're basically flat. That's what people will say, that the stock market has proven that it's not